This Week with Bob Mueller on News 2.
This week,
caseloads are too high. Kids are sleeping on the floors. Children cannot live in these conditions.
a scathing audit finds kids in DCS custody sleeping on office floors for weeks, and 97% of caseworkers quitting after the first year. More in our This Week cover story.
We have a problem, we're going to fix it. We have new leadership at DCS.
Governor Lee has shown no interest in a special session to deal with DCS problems, but says help is on the way.
I'm surprised by that. It's actually somewhat consistent with what we see nationally, that Trump is in trouble in a variety of ways. And DeSantis seems to be at least he's the flavor of the month, if not the year.
Donald Trump would lose badly to Ron DeSantis for the GOP presidential nomination here in Tennessee. That's the finding of a new Vanderbilt University poll.
We're surrounded by states that have already done that, and then of course we have proximate states that now have legalized medical marijuana, so we're almost an island here.
And Tennessee lawmakers will try again to legalize marijuana, this time for recreational use. Tennessee is one of only a handful of states with no form of legalized cannabis. Hello again and welcome to another edition of This Week. The word crisis was used 17 times in an audit of the Tennessee Department of Children's Services. More in our This Week cover story. A new Vanderbilt poll is bad news for Trump and anti-abortion forces. But first, a look at the other political headlines of the week. Tennessee has debated cannabis legislation several times before, but each time it fails. Now the legislature is ready to try again. Chris O'Brien with a first look at the bill.
It never quite leaves the conversation here in Tennessee.
We're surrounded by states that have already done that, and then of course we have proximate states that now have legalized medical marijuana, so we're almost an island here.
And now there's new legislation coming to try and introduce cannabis access to our state.
It's a full legalization of cannabis across the state.
Representative Bob Freeman and Senator Heidi Campbell, both Nashville Democrats, plan on filing the bill in the very near future. One of the reasons is the belief that eventually the federal government will legalize cannabis. If that happens, Tennessee would theoretically miss out on tax revenue more than it is right now.
Let's not delude ourselves that people aren't, crossing the border and, getting cannabis from other states. Of course they are. So that's just income that we're missing out on.
Freeman says one reason he wants to pass the bill is because it disproportionately affects people of lower income.
If you live in a wealthy part of the state and a wealthy community in our city, the odds of you getting a slap on the wrist and nothing happening is pretty high. If you live in a poorer neighborhood and you get picked up with cannabis, you're going to jail.
Freeman feels mildly confident about its passage. On a scale of 1 to 10?
A solid 7.5.
Though Campbell wasn't as optimistic.
I'm pretty low. I won't give you a number, but I have no delusions that we're going to pass it this session.
She says regardless, it's important to keep the conversation around cannabis alive. In Nashville, Chris O'Brien.
The president signed legislation protecting same-sex and interracial marriage. The Respect for Marriage Act was not supported by Middle Tennessee Congressman Mark Green, John Rose, and Scott Desjardins. It was also opposed by Tennessee Senators Marsha Blackburn and Bill Hagerty, citing concerns about religious liberty. Here's Liz Kreutz.
Alongside survivors of the Club Q and Pulse nightclub shootings, today a historic moment at the White House. President Biden signing the Respect for Marriage Act, which protects the rights of same-sex and interracial couples under federal law.
Marriage is a simple proposition. Who do you love? And will you be loyal to that person you love? It's not more complicated than that.
The new law requires states to honor all marriages, regardless of sex, race, ethnicity, or national origin. It also has protections for religious institutions and does not require states to issue same-sex marriage licenses. The law, a reaction to the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade, and Justice Clarence Thomas calling for marriage-related precedents to also be reconsidered. Tammy Baldwin, the country's first openly gay senator, said the bill will ease fears about that happening.
We can put to rest the worries of millions of loving couples.
The bill passed the House and Senate with bipartisan support, although a majority of Republicans did vote against it, some calling it unnecessary.
I hope and pray that my colleagues will find the courage to join me in opposing this this misguided and this dangerous bill.
Among those at the White House today, the executive director of Equality California, Tony Huang, recently married his husband Ian.
The fact that we were able to legally get married in the state of California and now to be able to go to the White House for this historic bill signing is something that's really personal to the two of us.
Liz Kreutz, ABC News, Los Angeles.
For the first time, scientists produced more energy in a fusion reaction than was used to ignite it. This is a major breakthrough. Washington correspondent Rashad Hudson is taking a closer look.
In a major breakthrough Tuesday, the Department of Energy announced for the first time a man-made fusion reaction produced more energy than it took to create it.
This is one of the most impressive scientific feats of the 21st century.
Fusion is the reaction that powers the sun and stars. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm says on Earth, it could be used to produce electricity and power cars.
Fortunately, private sector investment in fusion research is already booming.
Researchers have worked on this project for decades because, Granholm says, controlling fusion could unlock a clean energy future.
This milestone moves us one significant step closer.
Kimberly Boudel directs the laboratory that helped achieve the result.
Over the past 60 years, thousands of people have contributed to this endeavor, and it took real vision to get us here.
But Alabama Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville says if the administration wants to eliminate fossil fuels, they need to present a more timely alternative.
There's not enough wind, there's not enough solar. They're trying to force a square peg in a round hole.
Granholm says we are at least a decade away from fusion becoming commercialized. Reporting in Washington, Rashad Hudson.
Now to our This Week cover story. A new state audit of the Department of Children's Services uses the word crisis 17 times. It reports kids may have been left in danger, some sleeping on office floors for days. Here's News 2's Adam Mincer.
To anyone saying the issues at DCS are new, Representative Johnson says roll the tape.
Caseloads are too high. Kids are sleeping on the floors. Children cannot live in these conditions. We're not doing best for those kids.
In March, Johnson proposed a bill to reduce DCS workers' caseloads to 12, a standard applied in other states like Indiana. While she says she knew the department wasn't in line with the 20-case average limit, she was hoping this bill would bring DCS into compliance and stop the exodus of caseworkers.
Kids' lives are at stake.
But the true reality is that we've hired someone to go out to try and recruit caseworkers. We don't have enough as it is to cover the cases that we do have.
At the time, some lawmakers simply said this change wasn't needed.
We will pay them well. We just need them to move to Tennessee and work. We have a problem with people wanting to work in the state.
DCS in the foster care side just really does mostly just administrative roles. So I don't... Again, unless I certainly hear something different from DCS, I certainly can't support this legislation. I just don't think it's necessary.
Those opposed? No.
Fast forward almost 9 months to today.
Eye-opener for all of us. I think we kind of saw some of it coming, but not to the extent of what this audit is.
The audit found 97% of new staff leave in the first year.
We're hiring a lot of people. We're just not keeping them.
But a 3-hour discussion of DCS's crisis yielded no concrete legislative solutions. A couple lawmakers saying people of faith need to answer the call.
We need our churches to step up. One of the fundamental charges of Scripture is to look after children.
And lawmakers are asking DCS to propose legislation.
I don't know of any legislation. I suspect there will be legislation. And obviously we will work with the legislature on any legislation that comes forward.
And potentially using the state's rainy day budget, but that idea wasn't discussed further. So while the commissioner says they're working to get children off of office floors and the committee wants quarterly check-ins, the solutions to these well-documented problems are unclear.
Stay with us. This Week continues in a moment. Welcome back to This Week. A new poll by Vanderbilt University shows Donald Trump hemorrhaging support in Tennessee should he be challenged by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. It also shows Tennessee Republicans and their anti-abortion laws and legislation are opposed by 75% of Tennesseans. Donald Trump won Tennessee with 60% of the vote in both 2016 and 2020, defeating Democrats Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden and all Republican primary challengers. But a new Vanderbilt poll shows Trump losing and losing badly should Florida Governor Ron DeSantis choose to seek the 2024 GOP nomination. The poll asks, if you had to choose of the following, who would you prefer as the Republican candidate for president in 2024? Ron DeSantis received 58% of the polling result, Trump only 28%, while 14% wanted someone else. The results even caught the pollsters off guard.
It's highly unusual, and it's unusual for a number of reasons. First of all, a former president who has widespread name recognition is running again. That in of itself is pretty unusual. You have a governor from Florida who certainly made a name for himself, but still is the governor of Florida, not of Tennessee. So name recognition should hugely benefit Trump. And Trump has a strong base with many Republicans, especially in this state, a state that he's won by more than 60% of the vote, both in 2016 and in 2020, and yet he's trailing by double digits. I'm surprised by that. It's actually somewhat consistent with what we see nationally, that Trump is in trouble in a variety of ways, and DeSantis seems to be at least he's the flavor of the month, if not the year.
The poll also found Trump's claim of a rigged election the big lie, and he, not Joe Biden, won in 2020, is not the majority view in Tennessee. The question, do you agree or disagree with the following statement? Joe Biden won the 2020 presidential election. 65% agree, while 31% disagree, and 4% were not sure. Trump is also now perceived in Tennessee as a loser.
You know, Republicans are very committed to their policies and they want to win. And Trump did not win in this 2022 cycle. He picked a bunch of candidates that were lost. Mitch McConnell should probably be the head of the Senate. Instead, he's the minority leader. And that's because a bunch of candidates Trump handpicked lost. Georgia in particular is a big problem for the former president because all the Republicans statewide won, save Herschel Walker. And Herschel Walker got beat by a couple of points when he probably should have won, but he was not a very good candidate and Trump backed him. And so I think that, you know, Republicans are not turning away from conservative policies. They remain committed, but they want those conservative policies to be enacted. To be enacted, you have to win. And Trump right now looks to be somebody who is struggling to win.
The poll shows Republicans are divided. MAGA Republicans who support Trump and the non-MAGA wing, which does not.
I think the key for the Republicans is that really the way to think about the party at this point in time is that there's a deep division between the MAGA wing of the party and the non-MAGA wing. Trump still has the MAGA wing behind him, but the MAGA wing is small, but it's intense. And in a primary where the anti-Trump vote is split by 2 or 3 candidates, Trump could easily win the primary, even though he doesn't have majority support. He might get 30, 35% of the votes. But the way the Republicans allocate delegates is he could get all the delegates, even though he doesn't get anywhere close to a majority, and he racks up enough to actually get the nomination. That's the thing that should strike the fear in the non-MAGA Republicans who want to try to win the general election, because there's still a path forward for the former president because of the winner-take-all system that the Republicans use in their allocation of delegates to the national convention. So nobody should underestimate the influence that Trump has. And also, Trump is a campaigner. I mean, he's going to be tough in a lot of ways, and he tries to grind down his candidates through insults and other things. Can someone like Ron DeSantis withstand that for a year? And does Ron DeSantis already get joined by Mike Pence? Does he get joined by Mike Pompeo, Nikki Haley, Tim Scott? There's a lot of potential candidates. And if all of a sudden all those people join the fray, Trump starts looking stronger and stronger. So the non-MAGA folks need to find a way to organize to avoid what happened in 2016, because Trump was able to get the nomination again, even though he didn't have a majority of support, because the anti-Trump vote splintered. And that's a disaster for the non-MAGA Republicans, which are the vast majority of the party, but still the rules favor the winner of the primary, and Trump could win some of those primaries, big ones especially.
Tennessee Republicans have said out loud for years they want to ban abortion in Tennessee, something that has always been out of step with national polls. Now it's out of step with Tennessee voters. Leaked audio shows anti-abortion groups telling Republican lawmakers not to amend Tennessee's near-total abortion ban for any reason. The advice is out of step with Tennessee voters. The poll asked, do you think abortion should be legal in Tennessee if the pregnancy is the result of incest or rape? 75% of those polled said yes. The poll also shows Tennesseans are not against abortion restrictions, just a total ban. The poll asked, do you think abortion should be illegal after 15 weeks, except in cases of rape, incest, or to save the life of the mother? 69% of those polled said yes.
The first is that Tennessee, which is a very Republican state, and 10 years ago was without a doubt pro-life, now a decade later is basically split 50-50 between pro-life and pro-choice. That's a sea change of opinion. And I think it's attributable to Dobbs, that there were a lot of people who said, yeah, I'm pro-life, until the right to choose was taken away by the Dobbs decision. And all of a sudden now they decide, well, they're actually pro-choice. And so the state is now split. That's a fascinating shift over the last 10 years, and not one that I would have predicted. But again, I wouldn't have necessarily predicted exactly the Dobbs decision. The second thing is that Tennesseans, while they are, largely, they clearly support having ban on abortion after 15 weeks, providing there's some exceptions. But I think that's the key caveat that one needs to have, is that Tennesseans do favor exceptions. So 75% of Tennesseans understand that abortion is available and should be available for those people who face pregnancy tied to rape or incest. Those are important exceptions not currently being granted. And Tennesseans are, in this case, they don't want to see abortions, but they also know that there's some key exceptions. So that's an interesting development that the state legislature is going to need to grapple with, because if they're playing too much to their base, it could come back to haunt them, and they need to think about broader policy initiatives that still support the right to life, but provide women the opportunity for exceptions in the case of rape or incest, or of course the life of the mother as well.
For abortion laws to change in Tennessee will require Tennessee to become more competitive for Democrats, and that does not seem likely anytime soon.
Well, I think it's a driver, but the realities are this is a very red state, and it's going to remain Republican. There's no evidence in the poll that suggests all of a sudden this is going to become a competitive state. And so, that's the case. It could be down the road. 20 years ago, Tennessee was much more competitive. In 20 years, it may become more competitive. But, these things change. But right now, there's no reason to think that these shifts that have taken place all of a sudden puts the Republicans at risk. Their voting power remains quite strong.
Stay with us. This Week continues in a moment. Welcome back to This Week. As we told you earlier, the audit of the State Department of Children's Services used the word crisis 17 times, with 97% of caseworkers quitting after the first year. The problem, too many cases and not enough case workers. Democrats want the governor to call a special session to deal with DCS issues, and so far, the governor has not been inclined to do that. This week, he was asked again about the DCS crisis.
The comptroller's assessment of DCS and the commissioners asking for more money, do you think DCS needs are immediate? And how high a priority is it for you to fix the problems that are going on with DCS?
One of the greatest priorities we have. We have seen the challenges. They are incredibly big challenges, yet they're incredibly important to address. We have a problem, we're going to fix it. We have new leadership at DCS. Commissioner Quinn has laid out a roadmap for how to address these problems. She has a plan. We are in agreement with that plan. We have we have proposed funding for it, long-term fixes, but we also have strategies for short-term fixes. She met with the General Assembly yesterday in a committee meeting, laid out these plans to address the challenges we have, and we feel confident that those are going to be met. Let me just say, we have an obligation for the security of children. We have an obligation for the proper placement of children in state's custody. We have an obligation to develop the workforce necessary, and we have an obligation to the workers that are at DCS right now, that are working there, to meet the needs of these kids. This has to be done. The problems have to be fixed, and we're committed to that.
Stay with us. This Week continues in a moment. And thank you for spending part of your weekend with us as we head into Christmas week. That will do it for another edition of This Week. We hope to see you back here next weekend for another edition of This Week. Between now and then, you have a great week.